Turn to 2 Samuel chapter 13. Second Samuel chapter 13. So last week we were able to see no other way to describe it, the dreadful actions of Amnon and what he did to his sister. He's put her out, shamed her, humiliated her. And tonight we're going to see what happens when that story begins to spread around, okay? When word comes out. And in this passage, what you're dealing with in chapter 13 is the beginning of a series of events. A lot of friction in David's home. We know one of the punishments, or one of the results of David's previous sin was the troubles that he would have in his family, and that's going to extend itself for a long stretch here over the course of 2 Samuel. Some of the things that happened in his family, most notably about Absalom, and that's who we're going to be talking about tonight. Let's talk about Absalom's revenge. Okay, that's what the rest of chapter 13 deals with, is Absalom's revenge. Now you'll remember, Absalom is also Tamar's brother. Of course, Absalom is her full-blooded brother. So here we have tonight Absalom's revenge. Point number one, word gets around. Word gets around. Certainly Amnon probably would have liked or hoped that what he had done would not be spread, that Tamar, when he put her out and bolted the door behind her, that she would just go off quietly, live in her misery, live in her shame, and keep it quiet. Now, Tamar does not do that, right? Tamar does not go away quietly. In 2 Samuel 13, we left at verse 18, so let's pick up with verse number 19. Tamar put ashes on her head, and rent her garment of divers colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went on crying. Those actions are symbolic of great sorrow. You read primarily Joshua chapter 7. You remember the story there of great loss for Israel, and Joshua and the men of Israel. It tells us that they do those same things, right, where they put ashes upon their heads, Joshua chapter 7 verse 6. They put dirt upon their head, they rend their clothes, just a pouring out of sorrow. It's an expression of great grief. Now, she rightly recognized this as a calamity. We're not expecting her to just deal with it, right? That is never right to assume that someone that has been treated like Tamar has, someone that has gone through what she is, there's a shame and a stigma sometimes that go with that, and she's not primarily, at least not yet, she's not quiet about it, and she is willing to voice it and show, openly show a great sense of grief and calamity that has happened to her. Nothing wrong with that. Verse number 20, and Absalom her brother said unto her, hath Amnon thy brother been with thee? He could tell, right? He knew it. We've got some young ladies here. If a guy ever takes advantage of you, don't feel like you got to keep that quiet. You share that. You say, you don't feel the shame of trying to you feel like you have to hide that. And when she goes and is now before her brother's able to tell right off that something has happened. And he actually knows right off, it was Amnon, wasn't it? Now, was he privy to some of the events, some of the details of the previous section? Did he know that she had gone to be with him, that she had gone to make him food? Perhaps he already knew that in some way. Perhaps Amnon had a reputation amongst folks. Who knows? But he's able to tell just by the events, something has happened to you, and it was Amnon, wasn't it? Amnon did something to you. Now it says here in verse number 20, hold thy peace, my sister. He is thy brother. Regard not this thing. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. Now maybe Amnon thought that nothing would come of this, but he was wrong. When Tamar leaves and she comes and finds her brother Absalom, and Absalom's able to find right off, like, something's happened to my sister, and it was Amnon, wasn't it? And his wheels start turning, and a plot starts forming in Absalom's mind. He tells his sister, listen, it's okay, come home with me, and let's not even think about this. Let's not talk about this. He says again in verse number 20, hold thy peace, he is thy brother, regard not this thing. He doesn't want her to say anything yet. Now we're going to find out why. And this is not because Absalom is trying to pull the covers over something. He's not trying to bury something or hide it. Absalom is enraged. Absalom is furious. And he's going to do something about it. He just doesn't want a lot of word to spread around too much yet, until his plan really can come to pass. Now, in verse 21, word still seems to get around, because we find out in verse 21, when King David heard all of these things, he was very wroth. Now, this was a terrible situation for his family, right? What Amnon has done is disgraceful. It's sinful, it's wicked, it's criminal. All of those things are true about what Amnon did to Tamar. Tamar, according to verse number 20, she remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. If you don't know what that means, it's just very well indicated for us that Tamar has nowhere else to go. There's no man in the picture. There's no husband. There's no potential husband in the picture for her now because of this scenario and what has happened. And it's just a terrible, terrible scene all the way around. And David finds out, and he's angry. And he's right to be angry. David is absolutely right to be angry for what Amnon has done, for what has happened to his family. The problem is, David doesn't do anything. You know, when you get into verse 21 and it talks about David being very wroth, that's the end of it. That's all that we read. We don't read about David saying anything. We don't read about David doing anything yet. Now, he got really, really angry, but there's no action there. There's nothing done to protect Tamar. There's nothing done to correct or advise Amnon about what he had done. Now, why would that be? Why is that? And different people, different commentators and folks have different opinions, different ideas. You know, one commentator thought that, David was just, subconscious about his own past and the things that he had done. And does David feel like a hypocrite if he says something to Ammon? Well, you shouldn't have done that. Yeah, well, Dad, you shouldn't have done what you did. Does David feel morally unable and unequipped to rebuke his son for what he has done? Some might think so. Other commentators, kind of use the evidence of the previous section, the first half of chapter 13, and talk about how David had a reputation for being pretty indulgent to his sons, right? Amnon, plays sick, and David immediately caves and gives him, whatever he asks for in that. And was that something that David did and did a lot of? Who knows? So we don't know exactly why David didn't do anything, but he didn't do anything. At least nothing that's here in the text that we know of. There was at least something that should have been done. We referenced this in Exodus chapter 22. Exodus chapter 22. If nothing else, there were corrective measures that should have been taken. Exodus 22, verse 16, if a man entice a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuse to give her unto him, he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgins. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, Deuteronomy chapter 22. Verse 28. Deuteronomy 22, verse 28, it says, if a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he hath humbled her. He may not put her away all his days. Like, there's at least some level of responsibility that Amnon really should be taking in this situation, right? There's something. There has to be some kind of penalty or fine or worse that should be exacted upon Amnon for what he has done. David doesn't do that. And so this right here, in a sense, starts to set the table for Absalom to step back in the scene. And from here on out, for the next stretch of chapters, Absalom is going to be a very main character in this story as we talk more about David's life. And this causes the first rift between these two, between David and Absalom. The fact that David does not do anything here. Verse 22, or 2 Samuel 13, verse 22, and Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad. He didn't talk about it. He didn't let on one way or another. He didn't, make things seem like they were great. And so, appear overly, suspicious. He didn't act like things were too bad in the relationship and make him suspicious the other way. Absalom just played it easy. But verse 22 says that Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. And in this passage, Absalom, his hatred begins to bubble and it begins to boil. And for 2 years, he stews over this. For 2 years. And he doesn't do anything yet, but he's taken his sister home. He's taken his sister to live with him. David hasn't done anything. And now Absalom is left for the next 2 years to just boil with rage about what has happened here. Okay? Again, this in a sense starts a portion of the rift between David and his son Absalom. David got angry. There's no denying that. I'm sure David felt a great degree of shame, a great degree of grief, anger, and probably a helplessness at times. But he didn't do anything. Okay? He didn't do anything. Number 2, Absalom's plot. Absalom's plot. Again, for 2 years, he's stewing. It says in verse 23, it came to pass after 2 full years that Absalom had sheep shearers in Baal-hazor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. In that part, we don't shear sheep. That's not our lifestyle. None of us are acquainted with that. But in the East, that would have been a festive time, right? That you gather together. We read about that. I think there's a stretch there in Genesis where it speaks of the similar. But you get, celebrate. And there's work to be done, but obviously it's a festive time. There would have been a feast. And Absalom says, well, let's just get everybody together. Let's get all the king's sons together. Verse 24, Absalom came to the king, David, and said, behold, now thy servant hath sheep shearers. Let the king, I beseech thee, and his servants go with thy servant. Hey, father, king, we're going to have a feast. We're going to have a party to celebrate the season, to celebrate the shearing of the sheep. Why don't you all come down? Why don't you? We're going to set up a place, and we're going to eat. We're going to celebrate. You and your sons, you and your servants, come on down. The king said to Absalom, nay, my son, let us not all now go, lest we be chargeable unto thee. David says, no, that's not a good idea, lest we be chargeable to thee. If you don't know what that means, it's expensive, right, to host a party. It's really expensive if you invite honored guests, and there's no more honorable guest than the king. And the amount of money that would have to be spent is just outrageous, right? Listen, you guys may not know this. Every time the president leaves the White House, every time the president gets on Air Force One, every time the president goes on a trip, it costs hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in money to get the president somewhere. It's just, whether it's the fuel for Air Force One and the security detail and the advance team that has to go at, 2 or 3 days ahead of time and make sure that everything's okay. It costs a ton of money. And yet, David's like, nah, it would have been similar to that, right? Now, there's no Air Force One in the Bible. Nobody's flying around. But David doesn't go anywhere by himself. There's an entourage. There's a group that has to go. And so David says, no, I don't think it's a good idea for everybody to go. It's too much. It's too expensive. It's not a good idea. But he says, verse 25, that he pressed him. He like, no, really, I really want you to go, right? Howbeit he would not go, verse 25, but blessed him. No hard feelings. It's not like David's like, no, I'm not coming to your party. It's, go, have a good time, enjoy, happy, for the sheep shears, enjoy the feast. It's just, probably not wise for me to go right now. So verse 26 said Absalom, well, if not, if you won't go, I pray thee let my brother Amnon go with us. Well, if you can't go, at least send Amnon, right? The crown prince, the one here in Jerusalem, why don't you at least send him? Let Amnon come down with us. And the king said unto him, why should he go with thee? Like, does David sense something there? Like, why is this why do you want Amnon to go? But Absalom pressed him in verse 27, that he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. So Absalom was obviously in some manner pretty persuasive. Maybe David sensed that there was something up here. Maybe through Absalom's talking, he was, any questions that he had were certainly calm, because it's going to work out that way. Amnon and the king's sons, they're all going to go down. But Absalom had a plan. In verse 28, Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, mark ye now when Amnon's heart is merry with wine. And when I say unto you, smite Amnon, then kill him. Fear not. Have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. Absalom gets his servants together and says, okay, when we get to the festival or the feast or the party, whatever it is, when, there'll be some entertainment, and Amnon's going to have a few glasses of wine, and when he gets comfortable, and, by this point, again, with the entertainment and the alcohol, the guard is let down, and when his heart is merry with wine, kill him. I want you to kill Amnon. Don't be afraid. Don't forget who commanded you to do this. You're right. Absalom, one of the king's sons. I'm telling you to do it. I'm telling you it's okay. Right? I'll protect you. I'm the one that gave the order. Be courageous. Be valiant. But Amnon has to die for what he has done. Now, it's been 2 years, and Absalom has been plotting, and inside him has been stewing this hatred and this anger and this rage. And he finally has an opportunity to get Amnon away from David, to get him in a place where he puts his guard down. And when he does so, tells his servants, we're going to kill him. And in verse 29, the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. They do. Amnon gets to this party or this festival, whatever it would have been. Whatever entertainment was there, music's playing, the alcohol is flowing. He's enjoying himself, not a care in the world, and Absalom's servants attack and they kill him. And David's son Amnon is killed there in verse 29. And verse 29 says that all the king's sons arose, and every man gat him upon his mule and fled. See, the problem is now, the other sons that were there, they think that, like, oh, there's a coup. Like, Absalom's killing everybody. And in fear, they all get up and they run, and they get on their mules and they hightail it out of there. They just assume that Absalom's going to get all of us. Whatever is in his heart, whatever is in his mind, he's in a rage. He's going to kill everyone. He's going to take the throne, the kingdom for himself after this. He's going to kill Amnon and all the rest of the king's sons. And so they leave and they hightail it out of here. Absalom got his revenge against Amnon for what Amnon had done. Again, this has been brewing, this has been bubbling for a couple of years now. And every day in his home, as he sees his sister, who he's promised to take care of and allow to come and live with him, and reality begins to set in of her desolation and how now there's no likely suitors, and just the shame and humiliation that Amnon has brought upon her and upon their family, it festers and stews. And he finally takes an opportunity and he has him killed. His own brother, his father's son, and he has Amnon killed. Now this is what we would say, this was murder. There's no way around this. Now obviously some would say, well, Amnon had it coming. Yeah, probably, but that doesn't mean that it's not murder. There's not a lot of sympathy. There's going to be sympathy from some, but there's not a lot of sympathy from Absalom and from Absalom's servants for what has happened, for those in his household. But it's murder. He does murder his brother. This is not a Avenger of Blood scenario where the abused party has a right within a certain time to extract judgment or justice. This is not a, hey, I killed him and I can flee to one of the cities of refuge for safety. This kind of scenario is not protected under those terms. Like this is murder. Absalom murdered his brother, a person of royalty, a person of high esteem in the land. Amnon, the crown prince, has been murdered. And everyone begins to flee. Now, number 3, let's look at the fallout here. Verse number 30, it says that it came to pass while they were in the way that tidings came to David, saying, Absalom has slain all the king's sons, and there is not one of them left. Now, that's not true, right? But whoever got away first assumed that, it sounds like they assumed that was what was going to happen. And the first person or two that fled and got out of there, they hightail it back to Jerusalem. They get back to David and they say, Absalom's killed everybody. Absalom's killed all the king's sons. It's not true. I don't know that it's an intentional lie as much as it's an assumption that that's what happened, even though that didn't really happen that way. But you can tell they were afraid, and they could see that Absalom and his servants were on the warpath there. And the king arose and tare his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants stood by with their clothes rent. Again, that concept of rending your clothes and laying on the earth, Genesis chapter 37, Job chapter 1, those are great signs of mourning and grief. To rip, especially someone that would have had, royal garments, to take the clothes, to take the nice clothes, to take the garments of royalty, and just tear it and sit in the dusty ground. Just a common humiliation, it looks like, just to express that grief, that frustration, that loss. David assumes they're all dead, because that's what he's been told. Well, it says in verse 32 that Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, answered and said, Let not my lord suppose that they have slain all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon only is dead. For by the appointment of Absalom, this hath been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. Here's Jonadab. Now, this is the guy that instigated kind of this thing from the beginning, right? He's the one that gave Amnon the idea to, you got to find a way to get her alone. This is the kind of the snake, the weasel that started this whole thing. I'm not sure how he had all of this information, right? But Jonadab comes on the scene, and he tries to give David a reassurance. If he's still in the royal court, word has probably not spread about Jonadab's playing in the previous portion. No, David, don't worry. They're not all dead, but I got to be honest. I think Absalom's been plotting this for a while. In fact, from the day it happened, from the day she came out and was put out, and he took her home, he says from the day he forced his sister, he's determined this. Like, this plan has been set in motion for a while. I think Absalom's been planning to kill him for a while, king. Now therefore, let not my lord the king take this thing to heart, take the thing to his heart, to think that all the king's sons are dead. For Amnon only is dead. That's an attempt to reassure him and comfort him that no more had been killed. But Absalom fled. Absalom now is guilty of murder. Now, you may not be mad at Absalom for doing it. And there's probably a lot of people that aren't mad at Absalom for doing it. There are probably people that would say Amnon got what was coming to him. Amnon deserved it. Doesn't change the fact that now Absalom has to go on the run for what he has done. He has to flee. He has to get out of there. It says in verse 34 that after Absalom fled, the young man that kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there came much people by the way of the hillside beside him. And Jonadab said unto the king, behold, the king's sons come, as thy servant said, so it is. See, king, look, just like I told you, here they come. Ain't no joyride they're riding back on. They're coming back. They thought they were running for their lives. But it turns out that, yes, that only Amnon had been killed. Verse 36, it came to pass, as soon as he had made an end of speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all his servants wept, very sore. This is just added to the heartache of David's family. He's lost one son already as the result of his adultery in the previous chapter. Chapter 13, he's lost the innocence and the virginity of his daughter at the hands of his son, and now that son has been killed, and that son was killed by another son. And reality is going to start to set in here that David's house is a mess. David's household. David is a good king, right? David, at the end of chapter 12, David's trying to get back to doing things the right way and trying to be a good king. But what God said in 2 Samuel chapter 12, those things are starting to come to pass. David's house now is a mess. It is a wreck. And they begin to weep. And there's just great sense of grief in David's family for what has happened. And all of his sons and all of his servants wept very sore. Absalom, verse 37, fled. And he went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. Now that's where his family would have been from. You'll remember back in 2 Samuel chapter 3 that David, one of his wives, was from Geshur. Maacah was from that region. She was the daughter of the king. And that was Absalom's mother. So he's going back to his grandparents' side of the family on his mother's side in this place called Geshur. And David mourned for his son every day. This is the second son that David has lost his life, and now another son that is on the run and that is fleeing. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. Chapter 13 ends with a question, right? How is this going to play out? because there's obviously friction. Now, can there be reconciliation? Can there be reconciliation between David and Absalom for what has happened? Now that 3 years have passed, now that life has gotten back to normal, now that this episode with Amnon is a few years in the past, David longed to go forth unto Absalom. But can there be reconciliation? A lot has happened. Absalom feels that David maybe should have done something. Absalom takes revenge himself to try to avenge his sister. David didn't do anything. And now Absalom feels like he has to go on the run to get away from the possible justice that was going to fall upon him. And that's not going to sit well, right? That's not going to sit well with Absalom if he has to get justice at the hand of David when Amnon didn't get justice. Tamar didn't get justice. So you leave chapter 13 and there's a great potential for this friction or this rift between David and Absalom to fester, to keep festering for a little while and linger. And when we get back into chapter 14, of course, it's going to be a couple of weeks for that. But what takes us a couple of weeks to get back to, David and Absalom are living this friction and this, opposition for years, for 3 years worth of time. And that was 2 years from the time that Tamar, was raped in the previous passage. So we're talking about from the beginning of these events, 5 years have passed. And for the last 5 years, Absalom is not sure where he stands with his father. Now, as we come to a close, let's just a couple of warnings about things from this passage. God does give us a warning in Scripture about not, chastening or not rebuking or not chastising our children when they are in the wrong. And David should have done that. David did not do that. And David probably would have known some of the stories that maybe Samuel had taught him or told him. He maybe would have known the episode of Eli. One of the things that led to Samuel ultimately becoming a priest was 1 Samuel chapter 2. You remember the story about Eli and his sons and how sinful they were, and Eli never really did anything about it. It says in 1 Samuel 2, verse number 27, there came a man of God unto Eli and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father when they were in Egypt, in Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon mine altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me. It was common knowledge by this time how Eli's sons were acting at the tabernacle. And Eli didn't do anything about it. And he was rebuked for that. Okay? Listen, when your parents get on you, know that they're not, they're just not happy-go-lucky with, we just enjoy punishing you. We just like seeing you have a bad day. We'll teach you a lesson whether you need one or not, right? Parents are supposed to correct and try to teach and mold their children. And sometimes that means rebuke. Sometimes that means chastisement and correction. Okay? So know that. It is important. There is a great danger when we don't do so. There's also a danger in letting hatred and anger boil and fester within you. The longer this goes on, the more set in his plan Absalom gets. And that begins to boil and that begins to stew. And I'm not saying that there's not an ounce of, there are plenty of men that would probably do a much similar thing to avenge their sister. And yet you can see that the more that this festers and sits on him, the more that hatred gets to, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. Dad wouldn't do anything, and there are prescriptions in the law for what responsibilities Amnon had at the least, and Dad wouldn't enforce them. I'm going to enforce them. Now, the Old Testament does not allow for just rank vigilante justice. Okay? There is the avenger of blood. There is the concept of the punishment meeting the crime, right? The eye for the eye, the tooth for tooth. But that judgment is not vigilante justice, okay? We as individuals don't have necessarily the right to avenge ourselves of every wrong to the extent that Absalom did. I'm not saying I don't understand. And I'm not saying that some guys wouldn't do the same thing in that spot. If it was someone's sister, or if it was somebody's daughter, you can rest assured a lot of dads are going to take action if it's at all within them and have the ability to do so. Amnon's only going to get sympathy really from his household, and that makes it a very sad situation. The Bible says, "Be sure your sins will find you out." And Amnon did what he did and thought he could just send Tamar out, bolt the door behind it, and as soon as the door closed and as soon as she's gone, it's over, and it wasn't over. Okay? It's often not over like that. We have to be very, very careful how we deal. Let's not get comfortable with sin. Let's not get comfortable thinking that this one wasn't a big deal and it won't matter in the long run, and time will fix it. Time will, be careful thinking about that. Okay, don't give in to sin thinking that it's not a big deal or that it won't matter in the long run, because Amnon had someone out for him, and that person kept quiet for 2 years, waiting for the perfect opportunity, and he got him. But that's where we are. David's house is a wreck, and he wants to go to his son, but we don't even know if there can be reconciliation at this point, right? What does David say to Absalom? What does Absalom say to David? And chapter 13 begins a series of chapters here now where David's family troubles are going to become very, very real to us. And Absalom is going to be a very tricky character for the troubles that he gives David in the next few chapters. All right? Let's be warned of those things. Let's be cautious of those things.